They did it. The U.S. women's national team are Olympic gold medal champions. And I can guarantee none of us thought it was going to look this way, for those of us who even thought it was possible. But that's why Steph and I are here to help you break it all down on Full Time, our last Olympics episode. Steph, oh my God. First thoughts about that game. 1-0, Mel Swanson, 57th minute goal. Tired? Yeah. Real.
Yeah.
Real.
I am tired from watching that game. I'm more tired. We had to get up on the East Coast anyway, early for the bronze medal match between Germany and Spain. Early for, kind of the day that it was, 9 a.m. And I was less tired after watching that game than I was this one, which kicked off at 11 Eastern time. It was grind ball. That was a real, mentality game result. So I don't know how you feel, but it's also it's almost the end of the Olympics. It's like, okay, we're almost there to the end. We're getting there. I'm ready for the nap.
We've been on such a journey together. There's the journey of the broader Olympics, which felt even more packed with drama than I can ever remember. I don't know if that says more about me or more about the games and the nature of sport and how it's changing itself. But then, of course, there was the journey within the women's soccer tournament, and a journey within that focusing specifically on the U.S. women's national team, because this was their first major tournament under Emma Hayes. There have been a ton of changes. I still clearly remember discussing with Meg weeks and weeks ago about the fact that Alex Morgan wasn't included on their roster. And I mean, when you think about that day when the roster was announced to now, cycles and cycles of lifetimes have happened. And in some ways, no, not all, but some, this game against Brazil, very much tale of two different halves, which I definitely want to talk to you about. But it felt like a culmination of that journey, from the struggle and the pain cave and the suffering. What do you think stood out the most in this game that sort of encapsulates the U.S. women's national team's journey in this Olympics?
That's interesting, because I think it was honestly overall their worst performance by far. Not calling it a bad one, but their worst one, which also makes sense given it's the sixth game, I think, in 16 days. So of course that's going to be your worst game. You're not going to be sharp after all that. What stood out for me? I mean, I think you and I talked about this before, a tale of two halves, right? You look at that first half, Brazil is keeping them penned back pretty far, pushing hard, counter-pressing, pressing, really putting in the shots on goal. The difference in XG between the two teams coming out of the first half, it was something like a full goal. The difference, it was 1 point something versus 0.2. Something like that. That's a huge difference. And then you look at the overall difference in XG from the game as a whole, where it's I think 1.5 something for Brazil versus, I want to say 1.22 for the U.S. The U.S. makes up so much ground in the second half. And you could tell, right? It matches the eye test and the energy and the vibes. Brazil let them rest, catch their breath, and be like, don't panic. They didn't score. We had some narrow escapes. That was the first half. This is the second half. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like everyone in their respective group chats were collectively getting increasingly nervous about every missed chance Brazil had in that first half, because, I mean, Ludmila, future Chicago Red Stars player, formerly of Atletico Madrid, she has been a menace throughout the tournament and did not seem to let up off the gas even a little bit in the first half of that game, to the point where she was making Naomi Girma do things that she has not had to do all tournament. And this is a defender who has had the tournament of her life, easily best defender of the tournament, and she was challenging her. I mean, if Brazil had even put in, I think as early as the second minute, they had a legitimate chance on goal. They came out swinging, and it felt like they had taken the exact same momentum that came out of that massive win over Spain and took it to the U.S. But they were able to absorb it. Probably a little bit of luck was a factor, I imagine, but luck has to be earned, and I think by halftime, people who know ball and people who are familiar with Brazil and really familiar with the U.S. kind of knew that they would be punished for it. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I thought this was such a statement game from Brazil, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about
Totally
Ludmilla.
agree.
They were turning both Naomi Girma and Tierna Davidson. They were both getting
Mm-hmm.
like whirled around in the box.
Mm-hmm. Adriana with Crystal Dunn at times
Yes,
down that wing.
yes,
Yep.
our own Jeff Ruder noted, in diagnosing the game that Brazil was really trying to play that wide game, but because our
Mm-hmm.
own fullbacks like to push high, it means you have to pull a center back out of there to come support in that space. And so what does that do to your line? And Brazil was like, "Yep, we see the gaps. Here we come." And
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about this a little later in the show, but ooh, if it had not been for Alyssa Nair, not just with the saves, but I saw in some of the communication, like there's this one ball bouncing, the sun's in her eyes. Tierna Davidson like pulls off at the last minute, and like Nair's able to collect the ball. Even that level of connection was really something that helped kind of like shore up when the rest of the team is tired, things aren't going their way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting to think about what Brazil's approach was to the U.S., given what they could probably assume safely that point about the rotation, given the fatigue. It sort of, to me, is like a good time to segue into the U.S. midfield, because even before we started assessing the performance, there was a pretty significant rotation that we are not even expecting anymore from Emma Hayes, but she did choose to start Corbin Albert over Rose Lavelle, which I think many people found interesting, to say the least. My concern, especially against a team that is, for whom creativity all over the field is so deeply ingrained like Brazil, to me, and I ain't getting paid for the job that Emma Hayes is, as she has pointed out throughout this tournament. But to me, the approach is undoubtedly to try and balance that with some creativity of your own. And of course, there have been questions about Rose Lavelle's health. She is now a leg sleeve girly along with Lynn Williams. I love that for them separately, but there was some concern about that. So, how did you find that decision, Steph?
I thought it was so interesting, and to me, it says Rose Lavelle must have been carrying some kind of like injury or something where like it
Mm,
wasn't even worth the risk for 30 or 45 minutes. Because if that's not the reason, then it's a real head scratcher from me. That midfield was deeply ineffective for the first
mm,
half, and honestly, parts of the second half as well. You could see what she wanted, right? She wanted Corbin Albert and Sam Coffey deeper. They're pushing Haran higher. But all the
mm-hmm.
things that they were asking Haran to fulfill, those are the things that Rose Lavelle does really, really well, and they didn't
Yeah.
have her, and then Haran just wasn't doing it. So the center of our formation, or their formation, looked like a black hole where US attacks
Mm,
go to die.
mm. And that's something that we've already, in this short Emma Hayes era period, have seen many times. It's something that we saw prior to Emma Hayes' arrival. On the one hand, the glass half full interpretation of that is, look at the results that they were able to get even with a struggling midfield. On the other hand, now that we are officially, somehow, it's crazy to say out loud now after everything we've been through, but we are technically now post Olympics, and it's time to, look forward. And I easily identify the midfield as the point of continued growth. I think that is where the highest ceiling is. Of course, we have Corey Bethune literally sitting in the wings, and there are questions about whether and how and if she should have been incorporated more into that starting eight or the 18 player roster. But on the one hand, they made it work without a well oiled, well functioning midfield. On the other hand, there's a sort of at what cost question there, right?
Yeah. I thought it was so interesting going into this tournament. You would have bet on Jaden Shaw to have at
Mm,
least some time there, and they were screwed a little
yeah.
bit, right? Because they had to manage that leg injury all through group, and then by then you're
Mm-hmm.
backed into a corner where it's like, well, she hasn't gotten time in the group stage. These are knockouts. Do you put a cold player in during knockout stages when I know what these other players are doing, et cetera, et cetera? And that's where we talked about before, like, is Emma Hayes coaching from any place of fear, or because she's
Mm,
been so committed to her decisions publicly, and how much of that is a performance for her players, right? We do know coaches, a lot of them, what they're doing in the media conference is not for us, it's for their players. And Emma Hayes definitely seems like the kind of coach that loves to signal things to her players and be like, I
Right.
set the tone, and the tone is confidence. It may not be 100% the most efficient or optimal decision, but at least I'm going to commit to it, and you can take confidence from knowing the plan. So, and if that works out, you look like the genius, right? And if it doesn't, you have to put on the
Mm-hmm.
clown nose, and that's just the risk that you take anytime you make a decision in sports. So, yeah, we can dissect it, but they're always going to be able to come back, but like, look at the color of the medal, baby.
Mm-hmm. And we had been chatting between the two of us. We've been chatting with Meg about that, how heavy results weigh in sort of the narrative. There are some things that Emma Hayes did, as we've said many times before, that Vlatko Andonovski did. But the difference in result changes, of course, the way that we're going to discuss those decisions. Speaking of Meg, she was, of course, in Paris for that final. I am so eager to hear her thoughts. I did not watch the medal ceremony because we were prepping for the show. So we need to hear from her about how that went. We need to get her thoughts about what she was seeing on the field, first half to second, that we may have missed. Let's chat with Meg about what she took away from this gold medal game. All right, we are here with Meg in Paris. Meg, we saw a lot of tears, like from the minute that final whistle was blown through, from what I've heard, the medal ceremony. Clearly, this has been a very layered emotional tournament for the U.S. women's national team. But what can you tell us about the vibe and the energy and the what I can imagine must have been a lot of catharsis that was just like pouring onto the field after they secured that win?
Yeah, I mean, Alyssa Nair came through the mix zone after, and I asked her about that little moment that she had with Mel Swanson and Trinity Rodman, and she immediately was like, "You're gonna make me cry again," and I was like, "Ooh, I don't think I even want to see that.
Mm.
That would make me uncomfortable because it would be so strange." But it really is. I mean, I think Mel Swanson obviously has had one of the toughest journeys over the past year, missing the World Cup, that injury, coming back, obviously playing such a key role on the team, scoring the winning goal tonight. So there was, I think, a real sense of catharsis for her. But what was really interesting too is that they've been so clear in just being like, we're not talking about the World Cup. That's done. Like,
Mm.
we don't care. And so it doesn't even feel like the catharsis was really around like
Hmm.
what happened last summer into this moment. I think it was, I mean, Lindsey Horan talked about this in the press conference just now of, we came into this wanting to have joy and wanting to enjoy it. And like, I guess Lynn Williams has been telling everyone, like, I can't believe I enjoyed this tournament,
Hmm.
which kind of says something about what the past couple have been like for the US. Because you think about Tokyo, you think about Australia, New Zealand, none of those vibes were particularly good. So I think there was a
Right.
sense of, they came in intentionally wanting to figure out like, how are we lighter versions of ourselves, how are we kind of balancing, because I mean, so much of the theme of this tournament for them has been suffering, right, and like
Right.
intentional suffering.
Uh huh.
And so to have that balance, and being in the press conference here in Paris yesterday with Emma Hayes and Lindsey Horan bringing up the karaoke machine, and
Mm.
the fact that they're doing Legos and like all this kind of stuff that feels really like, why are we talking about this right now, but is so much more important than people realize, especially if you've been around this team for a while, because
Mm.
I think there is that piece of it. And so that joy coming through, and whether it came in the form of tears or in the form of just, I mean, like, everybody walking through the mix on was clearly just the happiest human being alive. I mean, Rose
Wow.
Lavelle also like straight up sprinted through the mix zone. So we were like, okay, bye. um, it really was just, I think, a very, you know, I think about Steph and I being in France 2019 and what those vibes were like, and
Mm.
then neither of us being at those Olympics, but covering it from a distance, being on the ground in Australia, New Zealand, and how different that World Cup felt compared to 2019, and then being on the ground here in France this tournament and being like, oh yeah, this is what 2019 felt like in a lot of ways. I
Mm.
mean, winning makes a lot of things feel a lot easier, and makes it also feel like this is a team of destiny, like all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it really, the joy, I think, is going to be a real theme, just because it's been a theme for this team, honestly, for at least the past 3 years. No
Mm-hmm.
sweat.
Yeah, this team's vibe going into this and throughout the tournament has felt so different, and especially like watching it Like you mentioned, you and I have been following this team for a long time, and I thought I had really reached the peak of cynicism when it came to just watching dispassionately. And something about, like, I got a little misty when they won and all the players were crying, and I was like, oh, they're gold medal winners, and I was just like, yeah. I found a new emotion, like I turned over a stone and there it was. So you're right in that it does feel, God, it feels fun. And it's nice to feel fun watching a sport.
Yeah.
And it's so
And
interesting. Go ahead, Meg.
it is kind of interesting because obviously this team has been one where there's been so much turnover, right?
Yeah.
But I think what has been interesting is kind of these narratives that we saw with Brazil, right? Of all these players kind of aligning to be like, Marta, you get that one last chance. But on the US
Mm-hmm.
side, what I think was really interesting was the players that they were aligning around were someone like Alyssa Nair, right? And being like,
Mm,
we need to get you that gold medal. So it was
mm,
working both ways. And I mean, that's actually the story that as soon as I finish recording with the two of you, I'm going to be sitting down to write about Alyssa Nair and that relationship that she has with Mal Swanson and Trinity Rodman and Sophia Smith, and the way
mm-hmm,
that, I mean, they have all talked about how both how much they love Alyssa and
mm-hmm,
like want to pull her out of her shell a little bit, but then also Alyssa saying they make me more vulnerable in
hmm,
a good way, right? Like
mm,
they make me feel like a part of this team in a way that I'm not. It's not that she hasn't experienced it before, but it's something special with this team, and so that I think is where some of these emotions come in of like,
hmm,
Steph and I again have been around for a really long time. We've seen Alyssa Nair be the backup keeper, get that shot after Hope
mm,
Solo, leaves the team, and have this kind of narrative coming into 2019 and then 2023 of like, is Alyssa Nair that goalkeeper? And then you have Alyssa Nair doing what she does tonight, right? So that to me is kind of, I think, the big emotional thread for me beyond just the kind of like this is a team figuring itself out in real time with a new head coach, all that kind of stuff. But Alyssa Nair to me is the unexpected emotional thread.
hmm.
Look, some of us asked a witch for a spell in like 2012, 2013 to make Alyssa Nair the number one goalkeeper for this team. I'm not going to say who, but I'm just going to say look at the results.
Look at the results indeed. I mean, to say that she came up huge in big moments, even that feels like an understatement. Some of the saves, I mean, literally will be posterized, from this
Yeah.
tournament. And what an unexpected, like, relationship that you just described between her and the front three. I don't think anyone saw it coming. And from like a storytelling narrative perspective, of course, it's been super fun to like watch videos of Trinity Rodman forcing her to like hug her as they give videos where she showers her with much needed flowers. Of course, that has all been fun, but to know that what we're even seeing in these, social videos is actually being reinforced on the field through these partnerships is both heartwarming and pretty profound, and I think can provide maybe some answers to this lingering question of what is the identity of this team moving forward, and how is this like passing of the generational batons going to actually look. And so what you just described, Meg, is telling me that part of that answer at least is going to include sort of that like bridging of the generational gaps, if you want to call it that, but also like a recognition of who has been doing the work and how you can continue to like pour into them, whether that's Alyssa into them or them into her. And it's really
Yeah.
really cool. That's really cool to hear.
Yep. So, I mean, they will say Aaron Heifetz, the team press officer. So, like, we had Mix Zone, which was extremely chaotic, but then press conferences, Emma Hayes and Lindsay Horan are in the press conference. Again, Lindsay is a crier, did
Mm,
immediately start crying.
mm,
And, but Aaron Heifetz, the team press officer, sitting in the back with Lindsay's ski goggles on his forehead, waiting for the press conference to end. And
mm.
let me tell you, they will be partying tonight. I feel pretty confident about that. So,
Deserved. I'm expecting to see champagne, beer goggles. I'm hoping that finally the girls can get their nails done, because I've noticed that that still has not really happened. Maybe they were too locked in, but there
yeah,
are still at least 24 hours left, maybe in the Olympic Village, maybe more. Meg, how are you going to be
yeah,
closing this out though? I mean, you have been slogging along with the team
yeah,
these past 2 weeks.
yeah. I have 3 articles to write between now and
Okay.
tomorrow.
So a bit more work.
Yeah, a bit more work. Multitasking, watching men's basketball, women's
Yes.
basketball tomorrow. I will be heading to the closing ceremony, so my first,
Nice.
maybe only closing ceremonies ever, out at Stade de France, and praying that that rumor about Beyonce comes true. We'll find out.
Ooh, I had not even heard about that.
Oh yeah, that's the big rumor. So I have my doubts, but we
Why
will
not
see.
hope?
Why not hope? Why not hope? You never know. I mean, the rumor about Celine Dion was true, so I'm just choosing to believe that the rumor mill is going to go, at least 2 for 2, if not 3 for 3. Yeah, and then get on a plane and then have some time
Process.
off. So yeah,
I'm here
sleep
for
for
it.
a week. Eat a lot of vegetables. Steph knows France. It's so hard to eat vegetables in France.
Yeah.
I caved. I ordered a poke bowl. It felt like the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. And yeah, that's where I'm at with France, is like desperate for vegetables and ready to go to bed.
Much deserved. Well, we so appreciate every contribution you've made to this Olympics moment, whether that was through your rich dispatches, the interviews that you've done, the contributions you've made to this podcast. It's been such a joy. Of course, as always, your insights add so much to the conversations that we have. So enjoy the rest of Paris, have a safe flight home, and definitely enjoy your vacation and your vegetables, Meg.
Yeah. Thanks to the two of you for holding it down while I've been in France.
Of
So
course. It's been a
Beyonce,
amazing
pleasure.
job.
Beyonce, Beyonce, Beyonce.
Yes, yes.
There we go.
Beyonce, Beyonce. Bon voyage, Meg. We'll see you later. Okay, so thinking about it some more, yes, there is a lot that we can say about the ways in which Emma Hayes and the U.S. women's national team's success at this Olympics has colored the way that we talk about the risks that she took, the decisions that she made. But I realize that I've been thinking about that more from like an external perspective. We also need to consider what this means for the team and for the players. What impact does it have on the team in seeing how these risks paid off? How is that building the foundation of a culture for the long term? Steph, how do you think that this gold is going to change this team now that they are under Emma Hayes, now that they have surpassed expectations in many ways and have a gold medal to take home as they look forward? I mean, yes, we're still 3 years away from the next World Cup, but as we both know, that doesn't actually mean anything because it's going to be on our heels sooner than we know it?
I think in a way, a gold for the older players at least, they are the architects of their own demise. In the sense of like, okay, when Emma Hayes was brought in at an inflection point, I just saw like the U.S. Women's National Team, their own Twitter account calling this Redeem Team 2024. So that's clearly part of the vibe.
Narrative's already starting,
Right? Right? We're moving on. This is a new team, although Redeem Team like is strangely caught in the past as well. But she's brought in at this time where it's like not just to steady the ship, but to guide the ship forward. So now that she has the gold medal, I think she was already, before this, being set up by U.S. Soccer and being empowered to make hard decisions, right? So the first hard decision, no Alex Morgan on the roster. But that's just the first domino. And now that they have the gold medal, it does make it emotionally easier, at least, to be like, okay, these long-serving players have done so well. We can send them off with like a gold medal and a farewell tour to celebrate all that. Thank you for your service. Now is the time when we have to finally start prepping the Jaden Shaws for 2027. And I think that's kind of where the team is headed next. So we're going to see, in these next few years, maybe the end of Lindsey Horan's national team career. I know that's bold to say. She's only 30 years old, but she's had, a lot of like health stuff building up. She's got her potato knee that's always having to get taped up. It's a shocker. Her body held up under this kind of beating in the tournament, especially in that position. I think maybe Crystal Dunn might be someone we see leaving, as sad as that is. I think Alyssa Nair might start.
Oh,
Right, that one's hard.
that one gave me
because
goosebumps.
I know she's only 36, right? So for a goalkeeper, and I could see her still being in the mix in 3 years because goalkeepers do have a longer shelf life. But you
for
don't
sure.
want to be relying on a 39-year-old as your first choice in a World Cup with no clear second choice. This is the perfect time
Mm-hmm.
to start training someone up and have them stepping into the spotlight the same way Alyssa
Mm-hmm.
Nair kind of had to take over after the Hope Solo era. That was hard. This will be hard
Mm-hmm.
too. I think we'll see maybe Emily Sonnet kind of leaving the fold. Rose Lavelle is
Hmm.
only 29, but she's another
She's also been
one.
through a lot
She's another one who gets beat
physically.
up just by nature of her
Mm-hmm.
position and what she can do. So yeah, I think we're finally gonna step into like this is the Naomi Girma, this is the Sophia Smith, this
Mm-hmm.
is the Trinity Rodman team, and then maybe we'll add into that this is the Jaden Shaw team, this is the Croy Bethune
Mm-hmm.
team, and I
Mm-hmm.
think people need to prepare themselves for this upcoming era.
I totally agree. And there is, of course, the very real fact of age and wisdom, the correlation between those two things. But as we've seen with players like Mal Swanson, with players like Sophia Smith, Mal Swanson started playing for the senior women's team very early, as did Sophia Smith. So there is this sort of like elasticity of time where if you have started playing with the senior women's team when you're still a teenager, you are inevitably going to have more experience that goes, not to lean on the cliche, but beyond your years. And what better way to sort of bolster what might look on the outside like youth than with an Olympic gold medal? You know, because with that comes the experience of having suffered through a tournament in which you played 6 games in 16 days with little rotation, where you have walked into this thing being told by your new manager that the whole point of this experience is to suffer and see what you can make from that. These players who are in their early 20s, some of them even younger, are having that experience, regardless of how many minutes they're playing on the field. But for those who have, that is catapulting them into new positions on this team. I mean, in some ways, that is like veteran experience, you know, that they did not have before. The World Cup, of course, was the first introduction for a lot of those players, but to go through a tournament and to come back with a victory gives you a level of wisdom, a depth of experience that makes you into a leader. And to your point about Lindsey Horan, I mean, we've seen the symbol of her passing the captain's armband to Naomi Girma as she exits the field. You don't really need that much interpretation there. And then to see the kind of performance and leadership that Naomi has displayed, it's hard to not see that. I mean, that is only going to continue. So I'm realizing that it is worth exploring how this win is going to impact the team. But let's also just talk a little bit more about like what this team needs to focus on moving forward as they continue to build. It's easy sometimes to forget how early they are in this journey together, and the fact that they were able to get this Olympic gold on such short time spent together in the lead up. I know we talked a bit about the midfield. We already have pretty clear guesses about who the sort of leaders are going to be moving forward. Steph, is there anything else that you sort of anticipate changing or think needs to change in order for this team to go from having done the, incredible to like normalizing this and building their own legacy?
I'm actually interested in seeing if Emma Hayes changes at all, because
Mm,
time crunch can really alter your behavior. The pressures of this kind of like timeline to an Olympics, maybe with a longer run up, she makes different decisions. She has more data.
mm,
Maybe she is so confident, but underneath it all, maybe she also is like, I need to rely on what I know, and what I know is like a Lindsay Horan or a Sam Coffey or whatever that is.
mm-hmm.
And some of those picks were fantastic, and some of those picks were like maybe with more time you would have gotten more out of a different player. We'll never
That's a
know.
good point.
So with time and a little breathing room, I'm actually interested in seeing how does she go about building that roster? Who does she call in? For all his failures, Vlatko Andonovski called in a lot of new talent that we now
That's
rely
true.
on today. So who is she going to put in place that we're going to rely on leading into 2027? And that's actually, I think, going to be really fun and exciting and cool, and we'll probably see her at a lot of NWSL games.
Yes. I wonder if she's going to try and be incognito about it or just like be out there with her flowy pants and fly kicks and like messy side part and fresh manicure. I mean, I already know what the look's going to be. So even if she tries to hide, I will find her if we're in the same stadium. But all great points, Steph. Let's pan out a little bit. And because, of course, there was a whole tournament with 12 teams, each of whom is on their own journey, which we don't have time to get into each of them. But how do you think this Olympics is going to be remembered for women's soccer? I mean, I had been calling it World Cup concentrate from the moment the pools were selected, because I knew and still had fresh memories from the World Cup. I feel like it delivered in that way. Lots of lingering questions for some teams. But what do you think is sort of going to be like the broad takeaway from this tournament, considering all the teams that competed, not just the U.S.?
It might be, and this is not a new refrain by any means, but that the tournament needs to expand to 16. Because there's no, even though it's like, yes, the best of the best make it in with just 12, the best of the best, not all of them were the best or their best during this tournament. We were talking about like which teams or players had like a coronation moment, and then what is the opposite of that? And it's probably a coup.
Yeah.
Like, or
no,
like
you're
dethroning.
right.
Like, who got dethroned? France, a big one. Yet another.
Australia.
Yeah, the Australia.
Sorry,
like,
not to cut you. Keep
no,
going.
no, no. You're absolutely right. What happened, girl?
Yes.
And then like Japan in another like, okay, I see the potential, but where are you going with this? You know, maybe kind of same for Germany a little bit.
Yeah, Germany surprised me, but they surprised me in a way that says more about their last performance than this one, I think. I mean, really disappointing World Cup for them. They didn't even advance out of their group. They are walking away from this Olympics with a bronze medal, having dealt with key injuries to key players even before the Olympics started, and illnesses and injuries to key players as the games progress and really were nearing their conclusion. I remain a fan of Julia Gvin. She is a baller. I feel like there needs to be even more commotion about her, and she came up big in that bronze medal match, converting a penalty against Spain. Of course, Anne Catherine. We could have a whole like side podcast special about her performances
Right, just
throughout this tournament. The steel, the ice in the veins. I'm still shook. I'm still warming up after that save in the Spain game. But there were some key and like really impressive performances from that team. Japan, girl, we are still all rooting for you, and they remain on the cusp of greatness. I could probably write essays about what they need to sort of unlock their full potential. But at the same time, there are teams, African teams, Nigeria, Zambia, who continue to deserve so much more than their federations give them on every level. And I think, unlike the World Cup, unfortunately, this was a tournament where I feel like the World Cup showed us what they could do in spite of their federations. This Olympics showed us what happens when nothing changes. And that honestly was heartbreaking for me to see, because they all play such beautiful football and they deserve to show the world really what they can do. So that was sort of a bit of a regression in that sense for me, because I think both of those teams could have gone deeper into this tournament than they were able to. And there are real systemic reasons for why they weren't able to that we must acknowledge. Let's talk about Colombia, though, because even leading up to this show, we weren't quite sure how to categorize them. They obviously made a huge statement in the World Cup, had an interesting Olympics, some high moments. I think that they did suffer a bit from the absence of Mayra Ramirez for those two games. But what do you sort of make of where they're at now that we're post-Olympics, Steph?
They're another team where I think they need that structural support to take the next step. You can't just go like Mayra Ramirez, Linda Caicedo, and be done with it. You have to talk about how do you build a structure underneath these players so that the team is always progressing and staying at that modern level of competition. And honestly, it's the same we talked about with Nigeria and with Zambia, not having to rely on generational talent, dragging them forward.
Right.
it's so hard because it is structural, and structural stuff ties into so much more. Like, what is the political situation like in the country? What is, the gender politics of it all? How that interacts with race politics? Like, what is the effect of misogynoir in countries, or like against not just black women, also
Talk
brown
about
women,
it.
right? Indigenous women, all this stuff going on, problems we have here as well, but which we can kind of flatten out a little bit with the ridiculous amounts of money that get poured into the program.
Yep.
So in Colombia, yeah, it like goes all the way down to like the club level, where it's like Linda Caicedo had a good club. Well, how do you make more good clubs? Where do you get the coaches for that? Where do you get referees for games? And that, I don't know, maybe it goes back to FIFA finally caring enough. And so then you're like, well, if it relies on FIFA caring enough,
Right. Dot dot dot.
dot
We
dot
know where
dot.
that leads. Right. I will say that what this Olympics tournament offered that the World Cup has the potential to offer, but we can't always guarantee, is a proof of concept for people who only watch soccer when the Olympics are on, who are like not yet dedicated enough to be following the NWSL or professional leagues around the world, let alone World Cups, but maybe happened upon this game when they were scrolling across things that they missed in the games. And I feel like we are now sort of like immune to 90% of the chaos that we know is inevitable in women's soccer. But between like the number of penalty kicks, between the number of goal line saves, between all of the drama with VAR calls, like we were getting all the things that we know to expect. But when you put yourself in the shoes of someone like Tom Cruise, who was featured on the broadcast of that gold medal game more than some of the players, but that's another conversation. For someone like Tom Cruise, who might be watching these things for the first time. If Tom Cruise is a women's soccer fan, I'm sorry for assuming otherwise. But this is something that has to turn you into a long-term fan. It has to ignite some curiosity about what's going on in the NWSL, what's going on in the WSL, what's going on with women's football in Africa, because who is this player who's scoring hat tricks? And oh, she plays in the NWSL, like as a product for newcomers. I think, again, this tournament over delivered. But for those of us who know, yes, there's still a ton of work to be done. And I think the accelerated and like packed and intense nature of this tournament compared to the World Cup really exacerbated what those problems are, because that's when you need that institutional support. That's when you need people on your staff who are going to keep players healthy. And when those things start falling through the cracks, it shows up on the field. So very much like lots to celebrate, and always lots to acknowledge in terms of the work that needs to be done to keep this game sustainable and equitable for all the players involved. All right. Our final bronze, silver, gold, Steph. This is a little sad. I've really enjoyed this game with you. I've enjoyed like interpreting how your medal awards like reveal your brilliant mind. So for the last time, let me not sound so sad about it, but for the last time, Steph, who got your bronze, who got your silver, and who got your gold?
Yeah, it was a little harder just because we had the one bronze medal match yesterday and so the one game today. Even though they were both, fun, it's not like in quarterfinals where you just have a buffet to pick from.
Right.
I would say so. My bronze, actually, you guys did not expect this reference to pop out, and I don't know where it came from, but the extras or the volunteers at the medal ceremony who all came out in their like newsboy caps and the slacks and the little white sweater or whatever, like the Legend of Bagger Vance extras all holding. I was like, I hadn't seen them dressed like that before. Maybe I haven't been watching enough medal ceremonies. So I was like, is that person there? Did they escape from cosplaying at the golf part of the Olympics? But yes, they were there. They looked great. My silver is actually how everybody, like, they probably had 10, maybe 15 minutes to shower if they wanted to, and then stuff themselves in. I noticed people had put jewelry back on. Maybe there was a little bit
Wow.
of like last minute makeup. It's so funny to imagine them in the locker room just rushing, like, oh no, I got to be on camera to get my gold medal. Meanwhile,
Right.
Germany, they won yesterday. They came in overnight. They were chilling. They got to watch a game, and now they get to go out and get their medals. They're looking fresh. The hair is done. They haven't been
Oh, I can't
sweating
wait to watch this back.
right for 100 minutes. So like everyone pulling together as much Luke as possible in order to be ready for the ceremony. And then for gold, it's got to be goalkeeping. Alyssa Nair and Ann-Katrin Berger, like mirrors of each other with like, just that cold focus. Berger especially, where like, even to the point where in the penalty the player's running up, she still has her arms behind her back. That's such like it's so dominant.
It's crazy.
It's
just
so
crazy
powerful.
behavior.
The energy, like the cold energy radiating off of her. I kind of want to like print it out and frame it just because it's such a, I don't know, it's such a moment. And then Alyssa Nair, tournament Alyssa, like whatever you can say about her club play, which goes up and down over the course of the season, when it comes to tournaments, Alyssa Nair is locked in. She is not to be distracted. She's doing the crosswords, she's making the saves, she's going home. No distractions.
Truly. Free podcast show idea for Ann-Katrin and Alyssa Nair, Between the Sticks with Ann and Alyssa. I would so listen to a show where they just discuss how they get into that mindset, because there are a lot of similarities, I think, in their like goalkeeping personas. And I'm very curious, like in what, like one, what other kinds of similarities they have, and just how they view the game. I feel like we don't hear enough from goalkeepers like regularly. And I totally agree. Their performances in this, I almost called it the World Cup, and their performances in this Olympics were stellar. They were unforgettable. They were like highlight reel, we will remember these things forever material. Well-deserved golds for sure.
Is it, would that be like the most powerful, brainy, educating podcast ever? Or is it 45 minutes of silence as they stare at each other, like willing the other one to break first?
That's true. It's possible that audio is not the best medium for them. Maybe it needs to be like a Twitch live stream situation so that we can at least appreciate the stoic expressions. That's a good point. We'll keep workshopping it. All right. My bronze is going to the nicknaming journey that we collectively as a society have been on in figuring out what to call. And really what I mean by that is how to properly encapsulate the power, the fluidity, the intuition, the like lethal force that is Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, and Mal Swanson. I remember positing this on Twitter months ago, when it became clear that they were going to be the front three for the U.S. women's national team. And it's been so fun to, one, read everyone's ideas, to sort of like negotiate what I view as like a pretty fundamental difference or like philosophical position about whether to include the prefix try, given that it is one of the players' names, and what does it mean to have a collective nickname for someone. Like, I found that question fascinating. I loved just seeing where people were drawing inspiration from, because that, of course, says a lot about how they view these three players. And then I think the conclusion of it was super satisfying, right? Like, yes, they should be able to name themselves. We love agency in this house. Triple espresso. We're done. Good. There's an emoji for it and everything. Like, it will be easy for us to like create codes from it. You can build off of that, because what does like a latte look like? How about a macchiato? When is it iced? When is it hot? Like, lots of directions we can take it. So bronze medal for the nickname. I love that. It was a great like conversation within the game sort of moment that everyone was contributing to and had a lot of fun with, including like veterans to people on Twitter, and Julie Foudy was, I mean, like, it was everywhere. So bronze for the nicknaming journey. Silver, I gotta give it to Brazil. I mean, they're a team that didn't come up in our sort of like who stood out, who's concerning us. But for all of the talk, rightfully so, right, about the U.S. women's national team's transformation and journey, Brazil has had one of their own too, and it's actually been quietly extremely impressive. I mean, they had a new head coach, Arthur Elias. He was coming from Corinthians in Brazil and brought a lot of players who made immediate impact in this Olympics. I'm thinking about players like Yasmin. I'm thinking about players like Tarciani. I'm thinking about players like Jennifer, Gabby Portillo. I mean, come on. They did not play at the World Cup. They are also new to the national team. They had a steep learning curve similar to that of like Emma Hayes, and they barely skipped a beat in their performances throughout this tournament. Losing Marta for 2 games, I can only imagine how devastating that was. And it was really comforting, both because of what it meant for Marta and what it means to me for this Brazilian women's national team going forward, that they were able to grind out these victories. And I can't even say that what they did against France was grinding out. Like, they bodied the World Cup champions, full stop. Like, no crumbs of like skepticism or hesitation about that. Super impressive. And I group Brazil and teams like Japan in the same group of like, girl, we're all rooting for you. When are you going to figure it out? Whenever it happens, we will be ready and seated. And for me, it's hard to not walk away. Yes, of course, they wanted to get Marta a gold medal. But it's hard to not walk away from their run and feel anything other, ultimately, I think, than optimism. My goal is similar to yours. I'm broadening it out a little bit beyond goalkeepers, but including them, of course. Defense wins championships. Defense wins gold medals. We've been talking throughout the show about the contributions of players like Naomi Girma, Crystal Dunn. I thought Emily Fox had a fantastic game today. There was one critical header that she barely got to in the first half that if she had not contested for it, if she'd not thrown her body on the line, Ludmilla would have been in the back of the net with the ball, like the defense stepped up in huge ways. Julia Gwynn, defender on Germany, getting involved in the attack, showing leadership. I mean, across the tournament, there has been really stellar and phenomenal defense. Of course, the pinpoint is one of the best players in the whole tournament, Naomi Girma. And I will always, always be grateful for the way that she is helping cast a much needed spotlight on that position. So you got to give it up for defense because, as we said, Brazil was coming at the U.S. hard in that first half and could have easily put a few away if they had gone up against any lesser keeper or any lesser back line. And even in that sense, Brazil's defense has transformed tremendously over the past few years. I feel like traditionally that had been the sort of like collective concern about that team, is that they're like all attack and nobody wants to get behind the ball. But with players now like Tarciane Raffaelli, that's becoming less of an issue. So gold's got to go to defense. There's been a lot of attention on the attack, rightfully so, but I will always, always stand on business for the back line.
I want to put a little cherry on, like, we've been talking a lot about Marta. It's probably her last major international tournament. It's probably time with her on the national team. But her career's not over. She
True.
plays for Orlando. She has been cooking for club as well. So you were
Truly.
mentioning people, I don't know if I want Tom Cruise to watch women's soccer, but other people who are watching women's soccer, like, who might be newer to this tournament, there's a whole league that has, like, honestly, sometimes even more exciting play than this, even more drama than this.
Truly.
NWSL After Dark will...
Fresher legs for sure.
It will ruin your weekend.
Yeah.
Like, all throughout the year. So just, like, a little asterisk on there, like, a lot of these players are coming back to club play, Marta included, so not ready to, like, cheers her off into the sunset just yet. Orlando is a legitimate championship contender, which we will hopefully talk about in future full-time episodes.
Oh, you know it. The second half of this season, yes, like there's a lot of fatigue from this intense, crazy tournament, but think of how fired up people are too. Think of players who were able to recognize their potential through this tournament and probably can't wait to get back to club to keep the party going. And yes, it's a chaotic party. It will ruin your weekend. It will make you feel things that you're not trying to feel on a weekend, but it's also the most fun. So if you're not already watching the NWSL, I'm not going to shame you. I'm going to call you in and just leave it at that. You will not regret it. You will not regret it. Now, I still have a lot of Olympics to catch up on because I've been so immersed in soccer, but in here and there, I've definitely been following my events. Steph, as we sort of close out this journey that you and I have been on in this Olympics, are there any like special flowers or shout outs or acknowledgements that you want to give for non-women's soccer Olympic events, sports, athletes, moments? that you just want to put in this archive?
Um, I gotta give. Yesterday, I was really enraptured by the women of shot put.
Ooh, I like that.
The women and non-binary contestants of shot put. Yeah,
Mm,
I. It's such an encapsulation of how the Olympics in particular shows us that like the athletic body is not one body, right? And when
truly.
you get to like the shot put, the hammer throw, right alongside, the distance runners or even the sprinters, you're like, each of these people is elite and they've honed their body to do something very specific, and each of them could like crush me
Mm-hmm.
in whatever ways, just like crush
Truly.
me. And I like that. I love that vibe. I was like, I am looking respectfully. I love a shot put, discus, hammer, javelin throw. Those are,
Mm-hmm.
although they are kind of like tense because it's like, at least with soccer or basketball, you get to play a series of games over a period of time. Where like
Yeah.
with that or the sprints, it's over in 50 seconds. You prepare for 4 years and that's it. Even if there's heats and stuff. So I got to
Yeah.
give a shout out to the mental fortitude as well for that. I was having a really
Mm.
good time watching track and field.
Yeah, me too. And it does feel like with every passing Olympics, there is more sort of like equity in viewership between the track and the field. I feel like before people were kind of only focused on sprints and then it kind of brought into the longer distances. And now we're tuning in for like the 1500 plus meter races in addition to the field, the jumping, the throwing. Totally agree. Everything is just getting more expansive and it's only making for more entertainment because as we've learned throughout this Olympics, every single one of these athletes has a story. And I think broadly speaking, that's the thing that I delight in the most about Olympics is the stories. I mean, that's what pulls us into sports. It's not just a ball moving back and forth across a field. It's not just racing toward a finish line. It's seeing how much an athlete is pouring into it. It's knowing that they have been training their whole lives, or at least since the last 4 years, for this moment. I have to shout out the Afghani breakdancer. I still need to catch up on breakdancing, but you can't even go onto Twitter without seeing the fly costume change that I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Maniza Talash, when she went from her first costume to her second and announced that she is all about liberation for Afghan women with the free Afghan women cape, that was so sick. And given that we are all, well, I won't say all, but most of us are learning a lot about breakdancing through the breaking event at this Olympics. It really just touched on all the things that you can use sport to do. Whether it's a high profile sport like basketball, swimming, gymnastics that you know is going to get prime time prioritization, or something new like breaking. This is also an opportunity for a lot of athletes who come from countries that are being oppressed, underserved in any sort of way to make statements. And I thought that that was so dope. I am always here for athletes making those statements because sometimes it's your only opportunity. And I think that courage and bravery needs to be rewarded. So shout out to Maniza. Um, and thank you for your courage.
Yeah. The IOC officially disqualified her for the statement because the
Mm,
IOC loves to insist that sports are not political.
mm,
And the very fact of having a refugee athlete category is inherently political. Uh,
right.
so, yeah, again, she had to have known they would DQ her, and she did it anyway because she had a platform and she wanted to use it.
Amen. I mean, she knew what needed to be done, and I will always respect an athlete for that. What a journey this Olympics has been. I've loved every second of it, but I'm not going to lie, I am tired and I need a break. I will be going on vacation, and the show will actually be taking a bit of a break as well because we believe in rest and recuperation in this house. So I will be going on vacation starting next week. The show is going to take a break from its regular programming next week, but don't worry. As we all sort of move through our Olympics withdrawals, we will have something for you next week, and that will be a special episode featuring a conversation with NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman. So you have that to look forward to next week while I am sipping on something nice in the sun, enjoying myself. Steph, what will you be doing though? Because we don't want to say goodbye to you this quickly or easily.
Still working, maybe a little bit of relaxation. I love a staycation at home. But I'll be back with regular episodes of Full Time with Meg on August 22nd. So you don't have super long to wait. I think honestly everyone should take a rest. We should all rest. Rest isn't just vacation, rest is like allowing yourself to enjoy things at a slower pace. You know,
Yes.
we all
100%.
gotta do it, mind and body.
Yep. One of my favorite quotes ever, Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote A Raisin in the Sun, never be afraid to sit a while and think. And that is exactly what I will be doing starting next week. But don't worry, I'll be back early September. You can't get rid of me that easily. But yeah, I need a break. I need to just process everything that we've experienced together. As fun as it has been, this is my way to make sure that I can show up to the show as my best self. So that is what you have to look forward to over the next couple of weeks and through the month. In the meantime, if you need even more to keep you satiated, which I wouldn't blame you for, make sure you give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok at TA Fulltime, TA as in like the athletic, full time on Instagram and TikTok. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Athletics free newsletter, which will continue to give you unrivaled coverage of women's soccer delivered straight to your inbox. And again, it's free. And we will be so fresh and happy and excited to dive back into NWSL chaos. The WSL will be starting back up again. Lots to talk about always in transition into as we transition from summer to fall, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. But first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone for listening to every single episode that we put together. We put so much time and effort and thought into every crazy reference and metaphor. Trust me, there's a lot that goes into it, but it's been so much fun. And what a tournament to have been a part of in this way. So thank you, as always, for listening to Full Time. I'm Tamerra Griffin. This is Steph Young. We enjoy and appreciate all of you guys so much. This show would not be possible without our producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our executive producer, Emily Olson, or our video producer, Leah Griffin, who just returned from a vacation herself. Catch me on Twitter and Instagram, sipping something nice, enjoying my life. Please send me book recommendations. I appreciate them in advance. I will see you in September, and the show will see you next week with that special episode with Jessica Berman. Bye!